The rain falls steady in the Arklay Mountains, fat drops that tap the leaves and turn the forest floor to mud. It's Thursday night, July 23rd, 1998, and the Raccoon City Police Department's Special Tactics and Rescue Service has a problem. For 2 months, something has been killing people in these woods. 10 victims confirmed, maybe more. The press calls them cannibal murders because that's the only phrase that fits what's left behind. Bite marks, flesh torn away, bodies half consumed and abandoned like discarded meals. The city is terrified. Parents keep their children inside. Hikers stay home. Campers cancel reservations. And the RPD brass, desperate to look like they're doing something about it, decide to throw S.T.A.R.S. at the problem. S.T.A.R.S. Bravo team goes in first. 6 officers, good people, competent people. Captain Enrico Marini leads the unit. They take off in their helicopter just before midnight on the 23rd, bound for the northwestern section of the mountains where the attacks have been concentrated. They're equipped for a manhunt, for confronting a cult or a serial killer or whatever human horror is responsible for the slaughter. What they're not equipped for, what nobody could be equipped for, is the truth waiting in those woods. The helicopter never comes back. Bravo team's radio goes silent 40 minutes after takeoff. No distress call, no explanation, just dead air and then nothing. By dawn on the 24th, S.T.A.R.S. Alpha team is mobilizing. Captain Albert Wesker, cool and collected behind his dark sunglasses, even at 5 in the morning, gathers his people. Chris Redfield, the team's point man, checks his Beretta for the 3rd time. Jill Valentine, master of lockpicking, tightens the straps on her tactical vest. Barry Burton, weapons specialist, says goodbye to his wife and daughters and pretends he'll be home for dinner. Joseph Frost loads fresh film into his camera. Brad Vickers, the pilot, preps the helicopter and tries not to think about what happened to Bravo's chopper. They lift off at 2200 hours. The flight into the mountains takes 30 minutes following the route Bravo took the night before. The forest spreads out beneath them, vast and dark and ancient. Raccoon Forest, locals call it, though nobody remembers why. The trees are tall here, old-growth timber that blocks out the sun and turns the ground below into permanent twilight. Even from the air, even with the helicopter searchlights sweeping the canopy, the woods feel wrong, too quiet, too still, like the forest itself is holding its breath. At 22:30 hours, Brad spots it. Bravo team's helicopter, nose down in a clearing, rotors twisted, and fuselage cracked. He brings Alpha's chopper down 50 yards away, rotor wash flattening the grass and shaking water from the trees. The team piles out, weapons drawn, and approaches the wreck. The scene is bad. The pilot's seat is empty, but there's blood on the controls, lots of blood. The passenger compartment shows signs of a struggle. Equipment scattered, seats torn, more blood. And on the ground nearby, arranged almost carefully, they find Kevin Dooley's body, the pilot. His throat has been opened, massive trauma to the neck and chest, wounds too large and too ragged to be made by any weapon Alpha Team recognizes. They're still processing this, still trying to make sense of it, when Joseph Frost calls out from the tree line. He's found something. Tracks. Big ones. Canine maybe, but wrong. Too large. The spacing is off. He's crouched down, trying to get a better look with his flashlight when they come out of the darkness. Dogs. At least they used to be dogs. Dobermans from the look of them. But the T-virus has rewritten their biology into something else. Their skin is patchy, rotted in places, exposing muscle and sinew. Their eyes burn with unnatural hunger. Their lips pull back from teeth designed now for one purpose. They move too fast, too coordinated. Pack hunters that have learned to flank and feint and kill. They're on Joseph before he can stand. The first one takes him at the throat. The second goes for his legs. His scream lasts maybe 3 seconds. His camera hits the ground, still recording, lens pointed at the sky, and captures only darkness and the wet sounds of feeding. Brad Vickers doesn't wait to see more. He's back in the helicopter before anyone can stop him. Rotors spinning up, lifting off and leaving the rest of Alpha Team on the ground with the dead and the dying and the things that used to be dogs. Wesker screams something. Chris fires his Beretta. The muzzle flash bright in the dark, and one of the creatures goes down, but 2 more take its place. Jill sees movement in her peripheral vision, spins, and there's one right on top of her, jaws snapping for her face. Barry's shotgun booms once, twice, and the creature disintegrates in a spray of rotten flesh and bone. They run. There's a structure ahead, lights visible through the trees, and they make for it because there's nowhere else to go. The dogs follow but don't press the attack, content to herd them forward, and that's when Chris Redfield understands this is all wrong. These aren't just rabid animals. They're hunting. They have a strategy, and somehow, impossibly, that makes everything worse. The mansion appears through the rain like something from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered stone and aged wood. Windows dark except for a few lights burning on the ground floor. The architectural style is European, Victorian, completely out of place this deep in an American forest. A cobblestone path leads to the front entrance, flanked by iron lampposts that still burn despite the downpour. The whole thing feels staged, artificial, like a movie set built to look like a house but lacking any of the small details that would make it a home. They reach the door. Barry tries the handle. It's unlocked. That should be comforting, but somehow it's not. Wesker goes in first, Beretta up and ready. The entry hall is massive, 2 stories tall, with a grand staircase leading up to a second-floor balcony. Crystal chandeliers hang from the ceiling, still lit, casting warm light over hardwood floors and expensive furniture. A dining room is visible through double doors to the right. A fireplace crackles. In a sitting room to the left, classical music plays softly from somewhere deeper in the house. The whole scene is so aggressively normal that it sets every nerve on edge. Behind them, the front door slams shut. They try to open it. The handle won't turn. Barry puts his shoulder into it. Nothing. Chris suggests shooting out the lock, and Wesker tells him to save the ammunition because they're going to need it. That's when they hear the sound from the dining room. A wet, rhythmic noise. Something feeding. Wesker signals for silence and moves toward the double doors. Chris takes his left flank. Jill covers the stairs. Barry keeps his shotgun trained on the dining room entrance. They can see through the gap now. There's someone on the floor. One of Bravo Team's tactical vests is visible, torn and blood-stained, and there's something crouched over the body, hunched and methodical, making those awful sounds. Wesker kicks the door open and the thing looks up. Kenneth Sullivan was a good cop, point man for Bravo Team, trained in urban assault and hostage rescue, father of 2. Now he's meat. The thing that used to be Kenneth is eating what used to be one of his team members, and when it turns to face Alpha Team, its eyes are white and dead and empty, skin the color of old parchment, jaw hanging slack, smeared with fresh blood, hands curled into claws. It stands and takes a step forward, and Jill Valentine shoots it 3 times in the chest. The zombie doesn't fall. It doesn't even slow down. Just keeps walking, arms outstretched, making a sound like a groan or a sigh, or maybe just air escaping from a punctured lung. Barry fires the shotgun, and the thing's shoulder explodes, but still it comes. Chris puts 2 more rounds in its head, and finally, it drops. They stand in the dining room, breathing hard, and nobody says anything because there's nothing to say that won't sound insane. Wesker is the first to move. He checks Kenneth's body, confirms what they all already know. He's been dead for hours, maybe since last night. The wounds match what they saw in Kevin Dooley, what they saw being done to Joseph Frost. Whatever killed him ate parts of him and then just left the rest. Jill is checking the other body, and she says something that makes them all turn around. It's not Bravo team, it's a civilian. Middle-aged man, dressed in casual clothes, maybe a hiker or someone who lived nearby. Same wounds, same cause of death, and he's been dead even longer than Kenneth. Rigor mortis already setting in, which means this has been going on for a while, days maybe, weeks, however long it takes for a house to fill up with dead people and monsters. Wesker makes a decision. They split up to search for survivors, establish a defensive position, and figure out what the hell is happening. Chris takes the east wing. Jill takes the west. Barry stays with Wesker to secure the main hall. It's a bad plan. Everyone knows it's a bad plan, but they're stars, and they're trained to handle bad situations, and frankly, there aren't any good options available. Chris moves through the mansion, and every room he enters looks like a museum or a tomb. Everywhere there's art, paintings by masters he doesn't recognize, statues that probably cost more than his annual salary, furniture that belongs in a palace, not a house in the woods. But it's all wrong. Everything is positioned too perfectly. The dust is distributed too evenly. The decay is too uniform, like someone designed this place to look abandoned, but didn't quite understand how abandonment actually works. In the east hallway, he finds a door with a sign reading Medical Office. Inside, there's an examination table, medical equipment from at least 30 years ago, and walls lined with filing cabinets. The files are all encrypted or written in some kind of code, but there are names, lots of names. Some he recognizes as Bravo team members. Some are older, dated from the 60s and 70s. Test subjects, the headers say, and there are photographs stapled to some of the files. People before, and then people after some kind of treatment or procedure that left them twisted and wrong and very clearly dead. Chris finds Rebecca Chambers in an adjoining storage room. She's alive, barely, and way too young to be seeing any of this. 18 years old and the newest member of S.T.A.R.S, assigned to Bravo team as their medic, and still thinking she needs to prove herself. She tells him what happened. Their helicopter had engine failure and went down hard. Captain Marini ordered them to find shelter while he tried to get the radio working. They found the mansion. Kenneth went inside first. Then the screaming started. People running, things chasing them. She hid because she was smart enough to know she couldn't fight, and she's been hiding ever since, listening to her team die one by one in the rooms above her. Chris promises her they're going to figure this out and get everyone home. He's not sure he believes it, but he says it anyway, because that's what leaders do. They lie when the truth is too heavy to carry. Meanwhile, Jill is dealing with her own revelation in the West Wing. She finds a study, walls lined with books, and a desk covered in paperwork. The letterhead says, Umbrella Corporation. She knows the name, pharmaceutical giant big in Raccoon City, major employer and political contributor. But these aren't normal corporate documents. These are research notes, test results, progress reports on something called the T-virus. There are references to biological weapons, to super soldiers, to mass production, and government contracts. There are budget reports showing hundreds of millions of dollars funneled into research facilities, most of them listed only by code names and GPS coordinates. And there are photographs, creatures, things that might have been human once but aren't anymore. Things that might have been animals but grew too large and too aggressive and too smart. There are performance metrics, kill ratios, infection rates, how long it takes for the virus to rewrite someone from the inside out and turn them into a weapon. Barry Burton finds her there, standing at the desk with papers spread out in front of her, and he sees what she's looking at, and he goes very quiet. Then he tells her something. Wesker knew. He knew about this place, about Umbrella, about what they were doing here. He brought Alpha Team into this on purpose. Not to rescue Bravo, but to test something, to collect data. Barry knows because Wesker told him. Wesker threatened Barry's family, said he had people watching his wife and daughters, said if Barry didn't cooperate, they would die. So Barry has been cooperating, destroying evidence, sabotaging equipment, hurting everyone exactly where Wesker wants them to go. Jill doesn't know what to say to that, doesn't know if she can trust Barry now, or if this is part of the test too, another layer of manipulation. But she sees the fear in his eyes, and decides that fear, at least, is real. She asks him what Wesker wants. Barry says he doesn't know, just that they need to stay alive long enough to reach the laboratory under the mansion. The rest will sort itself out after that. They head back to the main hall and find Chris and Rebecca have returned. Wesker is gone. He left a note saying he's scouting the second floor and to wait for his return. Nobody believes that. Chris checks his ammunition. 7 rounds left in the Beretta. Jill has 9. Barry has 12 shotgun shells. Rebecca has her mixing kit for chemical compounds, but no weapon. It's not enough, not for what's in this house. The mansion reveals itself slowly, room by room, like a puzzle that doesn't want to be solved. The ground floor is a maze of interconnected spaces, each one more bizarre than the last. There's a dining room with a grandfather clock that won't work until you insert a golden emblem pried from above the fireplace. There's an art gallery with a statue of a woman drawing water, and inside the stone urn is a map of the grounds. There's a bathroom with a bathtub full of filthy water, and inside that water is a key that unlocks a desk in a room they haven't found yet. Every lock requires a key. Every key requires solving a puzzle, and the whole time, things move in the shadows. Footsteps on the floor above, doors opening and closing by themselves. The sense of being watched from angles the human eye can't quite track. They encounter more of the dead. Some are Umbrella staff, scientists and security personnel who turned when the virus got loose. Some are civilians, hikers and tourists who wandered too close and never made it out. And some are Bravo team. They find Forrest Speyer on a second-floor balcony, face down with crows picking at his corpse. Richard Aiken is in a side room, alive but poisoned, dying slowly from a snake bite he got exploring the attic. Enrico Marini is in the underground tunnels, and he lives just long enough to tell them there's a traitor in S.T.A.R.S before someone shoots him in the back, and he falls into the water and doesn't come up. The creatures multiply as they go deeper. The shambling zombies are the least of their problems. There are dogs, infected and feral, that patrol the grounds and courtyard. There are crows that swarm in murder-sized flocks, pecking and clawing until you're blind or unconscious or dead. In the underground passage, there are giant spiders, web spinners that lost their web spinning ability when they grew to the size of motorcycles, but kept their appetite and their venom. In the residence, there's Plant 42, a Venus flytrap that the T-virus turned into something massive and carnivorous. Roots spread throughout the building like a nervous system, tendrils strong enough to crush bone. And in the attic, coiled around the pillars, there's Yawn, 30 feet of snake, scales still wet from where it shed its skin, poison in its fangs that will kill you in minutes if you're unlucky and hours if you're not. The first time they encounter it, they run. The second time, in the library, they have no choice but to fight. Jill empties her bazooka into it. Chris goes through 2 full magazines. Barry uses most of his remaining shells. When it finally dies, It thrashes for another minute, knocking over bookshelves and breaking furniture, and then it goes still, and they can all breathe again. But that's not the worst thing in the mansion. The worst thing is Lisa. They find evidence of her first, a diary written in a child's handwriting, pages scattered through the underground complex. The entries start normal. A girl, 14 years old, excited to visit her father's new building project. She writes about playing piano for Mr. Spencer, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She writes about the mansion being so big and pretty. She writes about missing her mother, who went to check on a sick relative and hasn't come back yet. Then the entries change. The handwriting gets shaky. She talks about men in white coats taking her to a room with no windows. They give her a shot and it makes her feel sick. They give her another shot and her skin starts to itch. She scratches and her nails come away with blood and bits of tissue, and the men write it all down in their notebooks like it's just data, like she's not a person, just a specimen. The entries get harder to read. The spelling deteriorates. Words repeated over and over. Mom, where are you? Dad, help me. It hurts. Why it hurts. The last entry is barely legible, letters malformed, and wandering across the page, she writes, face, face, not face, want mama, face. They encounter Lisa in a cabin near the estate's crypt. She's wearing what might have been a dress once, now just ragged cloth hanging from a body that the virus rebuilt according to its own logic. Her face is gone, replaced with someone else's face. Someone she killed and skinned because she needed to wear a face that looked like her mother's. Her hands are clawed, arms too long, posture hunched from 30 years of agony and loneliness and madness. She makes sounds that might be words or might just be screaming. She doesn't attack them. She just stands there, swaying slightly. And Jill realizes this thing that used to be a little girl is trying to recognize them, trying to determine if they're her parents, if they've finally come to take her home. When she understands they're not, when she accepts that her parents are never coming, something breaks in whatever consciousness she has left. She backs away and disappears into the shadows, and they never see her again. Later, they'll find research notes explaining what was done to her, variant after variant of experimental viruses, administered over decades. She survived them all. Her body adapted, mutated, became resistant to the very things that should have killed her. Umbrella kept her alive because she was valuable data, a test subject who could withstand dosages that would destroy anyone else. They used her to develop the nemesis parasite. They used her cells to culture strains of the G virus. They used her until there was nothing human left, except the need for her mother's face. The courtyard becomes accessible once they solve the right puzzles, collect the right keys. It's a garden, overgrown now, hedges tall and wild, pathways choked with weeds. In the center there's a fountain, water still running even though nobody's been here to maintain it for months. Beyond the garden is a smaller building, living quarters for the research staff. The interior is ransacked, furniture overturned, walls scratched and broken. This is where people tried to barricade themselves when the outbreak started. It didn't work. The doors are torn open. The windows are smashed. Whatever got in killed everyone inside. They find more research notes here. These ones detail the final days. On May 11th, 1998, the E strain of the T virus escaped containment during a test on the T002 specimen. The virus went airborne. Within hours, dozens of researchers were showing symptoms. The security team tried to establish quarantine protocols, but the infected were already past the checkpoints. Staff were ordered to remain in the facility. Attempts to escape were met with lethal force. That's why no one called for help. That's why no one got out. Umbrella sealed them in and let the virus do its work because the data was worth more than the lives. Deep under the residence, accessible through a network of old mining tunnels, they find the laboratory proper. This is where it all happened, where Umbrella's mad science turned theory into practice. The halls are wider here, sterile, lined with reinforced glass and heavy security doors. Most of the lights are out. Emergency lighting casts everything in red. Water drips from pipes in the ceiling. Something large is moving in the darkness ahead. The laboratory complex is vast. There's a power facility to keep the systems running. There's an aquatic research wing where they tested the virus on marine life. Tanks full of green water and things that might be sharks but move wrong. There's a botany section where Plant 42 and its derivatives were cultivated. There's a prison block, cells designed to hold human test subjects during the observation period after infection. Most of the cells are empty now, doors hanging open, restraints torn free. A few still contain bodies, subjects who died before they could transform. Their eyes are open. They don't look peaceful. In the deepest section, past security checkpoints that Barry has to override with codes Wesker left him, they find the real prize, the Tyrant Chamber. It's a massive room, cathedral-like in its proportions, with a single transparent tube in the center. Inside the tube, suspended in preservative fluid, is something that might have been human once. 7 feet tall, skin pale and waxy, musculature overdeveloped to the point of deformity. The left hand has mutated into a massive claw, talons each as long as a knife blade. Its heart is visible through the chest wall, oversized and beating slow and steady. The monitoring equipment around the tube shows vital signs, brainwave activity, everything normal for a creature that should not exist. This is T-002, Umbrella's crowning achievement, the Tyrant Project's first successful test subject, the template for every super soldier they plan to create after this. It was supposed to be smart enough to follow complex orders, strong enough to tear through enemy lines, resilient enough to survive wounds that would kill a normal human. It was supposed to change warfare forever. Albert Wesker is standing in front of the tube when they enter. He's been waiting for them. Behind him, the control panel shows someone has initiated the wake-up sequence. The fluid in the tube is draining. The Tyrant's eyes are opening. Chris asks Wesker what he's done. Wesker turns around and his sunglasses reflect the red emergency lighting, and he looks pleased with himself in a way that makes everyone's finger find their trigger. He explains it simply because there's no reason to hide anymore. He works for Umbrella. He always worked for Umbrella. S.T.A.R.S was just cover, a way to maintain a presence in Raccoon City and keep track of any threats to the company's operations. When the Arclay facility went dark, Umbrella needed to know if the bioweapons were viable in combat conditions. They needed field data, combat performance metrics, survival rates, and S.T.A.R.S, well-trained and well-armed, made perfect test subjects. He sent Bravo team in first to clear out some of the weaker specimens and provide baseline data. Then he brought Alpha team in to face the more advanced threats. Everything that's happened tonight, every death and every horror, was part of a test, and they've all performed beautifully. Barry raises a shotgun but doesn't fire. Jill wants to, but hesitates because she needs to know why. Why her? Why her team? Why any of this? Wesker says it's nothing personal. It's just business, just research, just the cost of progress. Then he presses a button, and the tube unlocks with a hiss of escaping gas, and the Tyrant steps out. The fight is brief and ugly. The Tyrant is everything Wesker promised and more. Fast, strong, smart enough to focus on the most dangerous target first. It goes after Barry because he's holding the shotgun. One swipe of its claw tears through the shotgun and nearly takes Barry's arm off. Chris empties his Beretta into its torso and the rounds penetrate but don't slow it down. Jill tries her grenade launcher and the explosion staggers it, but when the smoke clears, it's still standing. Wesker stands there watching, taking notes on a tablet, utterly calm. He tells them they're doing great. The data is excellent. Keep it up. Then the tyrant turns on him, just pivots, faster than something that size should be able to move, and drives its claw through Wesker's chest. Wesker looks down at the claw protruding from his sternum, and his expression is almost surprised, like he didn't see this coming, like he really thought he had control. The tyrant lifts him up, holds him there for a moment, then throws him aside like garbage. Wesker hits a wall and slides to the floor and doesn't move. The tyrant turns back to Chris and Jill and resumes its attack because that's what it was made to do. Not to obey orders, not to be controlled, just to kill. Rebecca finds a solution by accident. The laboratory's power systems are networked together. If one section loses power, it creates a cascade failure that triggers the emergency self-destruct protocol. It's a safety measure designed to prevent any outbreak from reaching the surface. If they can overload the system, they can destroy the whole facility, everything in it. All the research, all the specimens, all the proof that any of this ever happened. Chris and Jill keep the tyrant occupied, while Rebecca and Barry run for the power control room. The tyrant is relentless but not creative. It knows how to kill but not how to adapt. They learn its patterns. When it swings with the claw, it has to set its feet. When it lunges, it commits fully and can't change direction. They use that. They draw it to one side of the chamber, then circle to the other. They make it work for every inch of ground. And they hurt it. Not much, but enough. Shotgun shells to the exposed heart. Acid rounds to the eyes. Anything to slow it down, buy time, keep it from landing the hit that would end everything. The power goes out. The emergency lighting dies. For one terrible moment, there's nothing but darkness and the sound of something large moving through it. Then the backup generators kick in, and the overhead lights come on, and the alarm starts wailing. 3 minutes to self-destruct. The tyrant is still standing, still coming, and there's no clear path to the exit. They run anyway, back through the laboratory, up through the access tunnels, through the residence and the courtyard and the mansion proper. Behind them they can hear the tyrant in pursuit. Heavy footsteps that shake dust from the ceiling. Doors slam open, walls crack. It's not chasing them with strategy anymore, just with pure relentless fury. And it's gaining. 2 minutes to self-destruct. They reach the main hall. The front door is still locked. Barry puts what's left of his shoulder into it, and the wood splinters but holds. Chris joins him. They hit it together, and the door gives way, and they spill out onto the cobblestone path. The helipad is across the grounds, up a stone staircase, past the garden where the infected dogs still roam. Brad Vickers is there, helicopter idling, rotor wash flattening the grass. He sees them coming, and he's already lifting off because he's not going to wait. Not again. Not after what happened to Joseph. Jill screams at him to wait. Brad hesitates, just long enough. They reach the helipad as the helicopter touches down again. Rebecca gets in first. Barry follows. Jill is halfway in when the tyrant crashes through the garden wall and charges. Chris turns to face it, Beretta up, empty magazine, but he can't reload fast enough, and it doesn't matter because he's out of ammunition anyway. The tyrant closes the distance in seconds. 3 more steps, and it will be close enough to kill him. Barry throws something from the helicopter, a rocket launcher, Brad's spare, kept under the pilot's seat for emergencies. Chris catches it, aims, and doesn't think about whether it's loaded or armed or even functional. He just pulls the trigger, and the weapon kicks hard enough to break his shoulder, and the rocket leaves a trail of smoke across the helipad and hits the Tyrant Center mass, and the explosion is bright enough to leave after images. When the smoke clears, the Tyrant is down, not dead, not completely, because it's trying to stand up on limbs that don't work anymore. But it's done, finished, and they're in the helicopter, altitude increasing, and Chris can see the mansion below, and it looks small now, just a building, just stone and wood and glass. Then the self-destruct activates, and the ground opens up, and the mansion collapses inward, and fire climbs toward the sky, and in the span of 3 seconds, it's all over. They fly south toward Raccoon City. Nobody talks. Rebecca is crying. Barry is staring at his hands. Jill watches the forest burn below and wonders how they're going to explain any of this. Who would believe them? Who would even want to believe them? Chris looks back at the burning ruin of the Spencer mansion and thinks about Wesker's body, still down there somewhere, buried under 1,000 tons of rubble. Then he thinks about how Wesker looked when the tyrant killed him. That expression, not quite surprise, something else, like he knew it was coming, like he'd planned for it, like even dying was part of some larger design they couldn't see yet. But that's crazy. Nobody survives being impaled and thrown into a wall and left in a collapsing building. Nobody survives that. Nobody human anyway. 3 miles south, in the ruins of the laboratory, Albert Wesker opens his eyes. His chest is ruined. His breathing is shallow. He should be dead. By every reasonable medical standard, he is dead. But 12 hours before the mission started, William Birkin gave him a gift. A prototype virus, a failsafe, something to activate if the test went wrong. The virus is working now, rewriting him, healing the wound, making him stronger, faster, better. He can feel his cellular structure changing, DNA recombining, abilities he never had before emerging like flowers through concrete. His eyesight sharpens until he can see individual particles of dust in the air. His muscles coil with new strength. His mind accelerates until thoughts come faster than he can process them. He stands. The laboratory is collapsing around him, but he moves through it like water through a drain, finding the gaps, the routes, the ways that shouldn't exist but do when you're fast enough to see them. In 90 seconds, he's at the surface. In 2 minutes, he's clear of the blast radius. In 5 minutes, he's a mile away, standing at the tree line, watching the mansion burn. He's smiling. Behind the shattered lenses of his sunglasses, his eyes are different now, brighter, sharper, not quite human anymore. The test succeeded. Not the test Umbrella wanted, but the one he designed. S.T.A.R.S survived. The data was collected, and Albert Wesker died exactly the way he needed to die, publicly and convincingly, so everyone would think he was gone. Now he could start the real work. The official report, filed 2 days later with the Raccoon City Police Department, attributes the mansion incident to a gas leak and subsequent explosion. No mention of Umbrella, no mention of bioweapons, no mention of the T-virus, or the people who died, or what really happened in those woods. Chief Irons, who takes substantial campaign contributions from Umbrella Pharmaceuticals, makes sure of that. S.T.A.R.S is discredited. Chris and Jill and the others are told to keep quiet or find new careers. And the city goes back to normal, pretending everything is fine, because that's easier than accepting the truth. But the truth doesn't care about being accepted. The truth is patient. The truth waits. In the sewers beneath Raccoon City, in the storm drains and water treatment facilities, something is spreading. Rats infected with the T-virus escaped from the mansion before the explosion. They're in the water supply now. They're breeding. And in 2 months, maybe less, the entire city is going to understand exactly what happened in the Spencer mansion. They're going to understand it intimately, from the inside, as they change, as they turn, as they join the ranks of the hungry dead. But that's a problem for September. Right now it's July 25th, 1998, and Chris Redfield is sitting in a hospital waiting room while doctors treat his dislocated shoulder. Jill Valentine is filling out paperwork that she knows won't go anywhere. Barry Burton is home with his family, holding them close, grateful he still can. Rebecca Chambers is staring at a wall and trying to process everything she saw. Brad Vickers is in the station parking lot, sitting in his car, hands shaking too hard to put the key in the ignition. And somewhere in Europe, Oswell E. Spencer receives a coded transmission informing him that the Arklay facility has been destroyed, the test concluded, and all primary assets are lost. He reads the report twice, then deletes it, and pours himself a glass of wine that costs more than most people make in a year. The Spencer mansion is gone, but its legacy is just beginning. What really happened in that house wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random outbreak or a containment failure that could have been prevented with better protocols. It was 30 years of deliberate, systematic horror. It was science weaponized against nature itself, against the very concept of humanity, in service of a vision so monstrous that even now, even knowing what they know, the survivors can barely articulate it. The mansion was never a house. Houses are built for living. The Spencer mansion was built for dying. Every room was a test chamber. Every puzzle was a security measure designed to trap researchers inside during an outbreak. Every elaborate lock and hidden passage was George Trevor's attempt to create something beautiful and mysterious, never understanding that his employer was commissioning a monument to cruelty. Trevor thought he was building a gentleman's retreat. He was actually designing a prison where the bars were made of his own cleverness and the cells locked from the outside. The architecture tells a story if you know how to read it. The main hall, that grand entrance with its chandelier and staircase, was designed to be impressive, to make visitors feel small, to establish the power dynamic before anyone even spoke. The dining room with its elaborate clock puzzle was a reminder that time itself was controlled here, measured and parceled out according to Umbrella's needs. The art gallery with the woman drawing water wasn't decoration. It was a statement. We take the natural world and reshape it. We decide what has value. We determine what serves a purpose. And the underground complex, that vast network of laboratories and testing chambers and holding cells, was the truth beneath the beauty. Everything above ground was facade. Everything below was function. The mansion existed to hide the laboratory. The laboratory existed to produce bioweapons. The bioweapons existed because Oswell E. Spencer believed humanity needed to be replaced. Spencer's vision was eugenics wrapped in corporate efficiency. He looked at the human race and saw inefficiency, weakness, potential wasted on bodies that aged and broke and died. The progenitor virus, discovered in Africa in the 1960s, showed him a way to rewrite the human genome at will, to force evolution in whatever direction suited his purposes. He founded Umbrella Pharmaceuticals with James Marcus and Edward Ashford, three men united by the belief that they were smart enough, visionary enough, enlightened enough to play God. Marcus took the progenitor and created the T-virus through decades of experimentation with leeches. The virus could rewrite cellular structure, enhance certain traits, suppress others. It could turn an ordinary dog into a perfect killing machine. It could transform a houseplant into a carnivorous monster. And it could, under very specific conditions, create something that looked human but functioned as a living weapon. The Tyrant Project was the culmination of that research. Everything Spencer wanted. a soldier that never questioned orders, never felt fear, never stopped until the enemy was destroyed. Mass producible, controllable, the future of warfare. Except it wasn't controllable. The T virus was too aggressive, too unpredictable. For every successful specimen like T002, there were hundreds of failures. Zombies, mindless and hungry. Chimeras, bodies fused with insect DNA that couldn't support their own weight. Hunters that were supposed to be smart but ended up being merely vicious. The perfect bioweapon remained just out of reach. One more test subject away, one more iteration of the virus away, one more dead researcher away from reality. Lisa Trevor was supposed to be that breakthrough. Her body's unique resistance to viral infection made her invaluable. Every strain of the T virus that Umbrella developed was tested on her first. She survived them all. Her cells adapted, mutated, became something new. When the nemesis parasite was introduced to her system, instead of dying like every other test subject, she absorbed it, integrated it, became a hybrid organism that shouldn't exist but did. Her suffering, 3 decades of unimaginable pain and isolation and psychological torture, gave Umbrella the data they needed to create their next generation of bioweapons. And they never even asked her name. That's the truth of the Spencer Mansion. It wasn't a place where bad things happened by accident. It was a factory where suffering was the raw material and monsters were the product. The people who worked there knew. They had to know. You can't spend years injecting a 14-year-old girl with experimental viruses and not understand what you're doing. They made choices. Every researcher who signed off on a test, every security guard who dragged a test subject back to their cell, every administrator who authorized funding. They chose this. They chose science without ethics, progress without conscience, advancement without any consideration of cost. When the Queen Leech attacked the facility in May 1998, when the Epsilon strain got loose and the staff started turning, they got a taste of their own medicine, the things they created, the weapons they designed to be used against others, turned on them instead. The zombies that shambled through the halls were their former colleagues. The hunters that prowled the residence were products of their own research. Even the tyrant, when it finally woke up, killed its creator without hesitation or remorse. There's a certain justice in that. Poetic, maybe, but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't bring back the people who died, the victims whose bodies were used as raw material, the innocent who stumbled into this nightmare and never stumbled out. George Trevor died in November 1967, trapped in a maze of his own design, starving in the dark while his wife's corpse rotted in a tomb below the main hall, and his daughter was tortured in a laboratory he didn't know existed. His diary, found 3 decades later by people who barely survived the house he built, tells the story of a man who realized too late that his talent had been weaponized against him. Every clever puzzle he devised to delight a wealthy patron became a trap that sealed his fate. Every secret passage he designed as an architectural flourish became a route for things that hunted in the shadows. His genius killed him, and Spencer knew it would from the beginning. That's why he commissioned the mansion from Trevor specifically, not in spite of the architectural tricks, but because of them. The estate's design served multiple purposes. It isolated the laboratory from outside observation. The puzzles and traps kept intruders out and test subjects in. The complex layout confused anyone trying to navigate it, buying time for security to respond to breaches. And it created a perfect testing environment for bioweapons. Narrow corridors forced close quarters combat. Multiple routes created opportunities for ambush. The combination of tight spaces and open areas, of vertical and horizontal navigation, simulated a wide variety of combat scenarios. Every room was potential battlefield. When S.T.A.R.S entered the mansion, they weren't just investigating a mystery. They were walking into a laboratory where they were the experiment. Wesker didn't bring them there to rescue Bravo Team or solve the cannibal murders. He brought them there to generate data, combat effectiveness of various bioweapons against trained soldiers, survival times in contaminated environments, adaptability when faced with escalating threats. Every fight they won, every puzzle they solved, every door they unlocked added to Umbrella's research. Their survival wasn't a failure of the test. It was proof that the next iteration needed to be stronger, faster, smarter. That's why Wesker released the tyrant. Not to kill them, though that would have been acceptable, but to see how they handled an opponent that was genuinely superior. The tyrant was faster than Chris Redfield, stronger than Barry Burton, more resilient than anything Jill Valentine could throw at it. It was everything a bioweapon was supposed to be, and they still beat it. Not through superior firepower or tactical genius, but through pure desperate innovation. They used the environment. They adapted their strategy on the fly. They worked together in ways no manufactured creature could replicate. They survived because humanity's greatest weapon isn't strength or speed or resilience. It's the ability to look at a problem that should be unsolvable and solve it anyway through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. But that victory came at a cost that can't be quantified in a report. Joseph Frost died in the forest, torn apart by dogs while his camera recorded his last moments. Kenneth Sullivan was eaten in the dining room by something that used to be human. Forrest Spire died on a balcony, crows picking at his body while he was still breathing. Richard Aiken was poisoned by a snake and died slowly in a side room, apologizing to everyone for being too weak to continue. Enrico Marini uncovered evidence of Umbrella's conspiracy and was murdered before he could warn anyone. Edward Dewey, Kevin Dooley, all the Bravo team members who didn't even make it to the mansion, all dead, and the survivors carry their own wounds. Rebecca Chambers is 18 years old and has seen things that will give her nightmares for the rest of her life. She knows now that there are monsters in the world, real ones, created deliberately by people who should know better. Barry Burton betrayed his team to protect his family, and now he has to live with that choice, has to reconcile the man he thought he was with the man he proved to be under pressure. Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield learned that their captain, the man they trusted with their lives, was working for the enemy the entire time. How do you come back from that? How do you ever trust authority again when authority proved to be rotten from the top down? Brad Vickers panicked and abandoned his team in the field, and 5 people died because he wasn't there to extract them. He knows that. Everyone knows that. He's going to spend the rest of his career being known as the coward who flew away when things got hard, and that reputation isn't entirely unfair. But fear is a survival mechanism. Fear is what keeps you alive when things want you dead. Brad's fear saved his life. It just didn't save anyone else's. The official report buries all of this. Chief Irons, on Umbrella's payroll, makes sure the story stays contained. The Raccoon City Press reports a gas explosion at an abandoned facility in the Arklay Mountains. No casualties, no criminal activity, just an unfortunate accident that's already been resolved. The families of the dead S.T.A.R.S. members are given bodies to bury, closed caskets, honors befitting officers who died in the line of duty. The truth is sealed in classified files that will never be declassified, buried under layers of bureaucracy and corporate influence. Chris and Jill try to expose Umbrella, They gather evidence, compile reports, reach out to journalists and federal investigators, and anyone who might listen. Nobody listens. Umbrella is too big, too powerful, too essential to Raccoon City's economy. The company employs thousands. It funds schools and hospitals and infrastructure projects. Its pharmaceutical research saves lives. You can't just accuse a company like that of creating bioweapons and torturing children without ironclad proof, and all the proof burned in the mansion. So the survivors are left with a choice: accept the official story and move on, or keep fighting even though the fight is already lost. Chris chooses to keep fighting. He starts investigating Umbrella's other facilities, tracking personnel transfers, following money trails. Jill joins him because someone has to, and she's not going to let him do this alone. Barry stays in Raccoon City to protect his family. Rebecca goes back to school because she's too young for this, too young to carry this weight, and maybe if she focuses on her studies, she can pretend none of it happened. Brad keeps flying helicopters and tries not to think about the forest, but the mansion's shadow stretches longer than any of them realize. The sewers beneath Raccoon City are already contaminated. The rats are spreading the virus through the water supply. It's slow for now, diluted enough that symptoms take weeks to manifest, but it's there, growing, multiplying, waiting for the right conditions to explode into full-scale outbreak. In 2 months, Raccoon City will burn. The entire population, 100,000 people, infected and transformed and reduced to shambling corpses that hunt the living. The government will authorize a tactical nuclear strike to contain the spread. And on October 1st, 1998, the city will be erased from the map. Not because of an accident, not because of bad luck or poor planning or insufficient response, but because 30 years ago, Oswell E. Spencer built a mansion in the woods and filled it with monsters, and those monsters eventually got out. Every death in Raccoon City traces back to the Spencer mansion. Every person who turned, every family destroyed, every child who died terrified and confused. They're all casualties of decisions made decades before they were born. Spencer wanted to create the next stage of human evolution. Instead, he created a plague. Marcus wanted to advance viral research. Instead, he created weapons that couldn't be controlled. Trevor wanted to design a beautiful building. Instead, he designed a tomb. And Albert Wesker wanted to transcend his humanity. He succeeded. The prototype virus that saved his life after the tyrant impaled him didn't just heal his wounds, it rewrote him at the genetic level, enhanced his strength, his speed, his cognitive processing, gave him abilities that put him somewhere between human and something else. He's faster than any bioweapon Umbrella ever created, stronger than the tyrants he helped develop, and he's smart enough to use those abilities strategically, which is what makes him dangerous. Wesker survives the mansion. He survives the explosion. He disappears into the black market bioweapon trade and starts selling his knowledge to the highest bidder. The data he collected from the S.T.A.R.S investigation, the tissue samples he preserved from the Tyrant Project, the research notes he stole from the laboratory before it collapsed, all of it becomes currency in a shadow economy where governments and corporations pay billions for weapons that can't be traced back to them. He's building something, a new organization, a new power structure. Eventually he'll return to Umbrella, infiltrate their European facilities, steal decades of research, and bring the entire corporation down. Not for revenge, not for justice, but because he's playing a longer game, one where the Spencer Mansion was just the opening move. Years later, in 2006, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine will track Wesker to Spencer's actual estate in Europe. They'll confront him in a mansion that looks eerily similar to the one they barely escaped in 1998. Spencer will be there too, old and dying, and he'll reveal the truth about Project W, about how Wesker was designed from birth to be a candidate for viral enhancement, about how everything Wesker thought he chose was actually chosen for him by someone else, and Wesker will kill Spencer for it, not out of anger, out of disappointment, and because Spencer's vision was too small, too limited, too human. Wesker wants to reshape the world, create a new humanity, stronger and better and worthy of survival. Everyone else, everyone who can't adapt, everyone who's too weak or too slow or too human, they'll be culled. It's evolution. It's natural selection accelerated by science. It's what should have happened at the Spencer Mansion if S.T.A.R.S. hadn't interfered. But they did interfere. They survived. They documented what they found even though nobody believed them. They carried the truth out of that house and kept it alive when everyone else wanted it buried. And in the end, that matters. Not because it stopped Umbrella immediately, not because it prevented Raccoon City, but because it meant someone knew, someone could testify, someone could hold the guilty accountable even if justice came slow. The Spencer Mansion stood for 31 years, from November 1967, when George Trevor put the finishing touches on his greatest architectural achievement, until July 25th, 1998, when Rebecca Chambers triggered the self-destruct and brought the entire complex down in fire and rubble. 31 years of research, 31 years of suffering, 31 years of creating monsters and calling it science. And in the end, it took 6 people, under-equipped and overwhelmed, to burn it all down. 6 people who were supposed to die there, who were brought in specifically to generate data for the next generation of bioweapons, who instead chose to survive and expose the truth and make sure everyone knew what happened in those woods. That's what really happened in the Spencer Mansion. Not a haunted house story, not a zombie movie, but a testament to what happens when science operates without ethics, when progress is valued over humanity, when the ends are allowed to justify any means, no matter how monstrous. The mansion was built on suffering. It sustained itself on cruelty. And it fell because people who were supposed to be victims refused to accept that role. George Trevor died in his own maze, but his diary survived. The S.T.A.R.S members who read it understood his tragedy, honored his memory by exposing what Spencer did to him and his family. Jessica Trevor died in a laboratory cell, but her death certificate was found and her burial site identified. Her grave was marked. Lisa Trevor, transformed into something terrible, was finally put to rest by people who understood she was a victim, not a monster. The researchers who died in the outbreak left behind evidence of what they'd done, evidence that would eventually lead to Umbrella's destruction. The mansion is gone, the laboratory is destroyed, the creatures are dead, but the knowledge survives. Every S.T.A.R.S member who walked out of those woods carries the truth. Every document they recovered, every photograph they took, every testimony they gave adds up to a complete picture of what Umbrella was doing and why it had to be stopped. And when Raccoon City burns 2 months later, when the world finally sees bioweapons in action, when the media can no longer ignore the evidence and the government can no longer cover it up, people will remember the Spencer Mansion. They'll understand it wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning, the proof of concept, the test run for a horror that would eventually consume an entire city and threaten to spread across the globe. That's the real legacy of the mansion, not the monsters it created, not the people it killed, but the survivors it made. Chris Redfield will go on to found the BSAA, an international organization dedicated to fighting bioterrorism. Jill Valentine will become one of the world's foremost experts on bioweapons and how to combat them. Rebecca Chambers will develop medical treatments for viral infections. Barry Burton will train the next generation of tactical operators how to survive in contaminated environments. Even Brad Vickers, the coward who flew away, will return to Raccoon City during the outbreak and help evacuate civilians before he's killed. They all carry the mansion with them, in their nightmares, in their scars, in the way they react to enclosed spaces and the smell of decay and the sound of footsteps in empty hallways. But they also carry the knowledge. They know what humanity is capable of when it chooses cruelty over compassion, and they know what humanity is capable of when it chooses to survive anyway. The Spencer Mansion was designed to be a trap, a place where people went in and didn't come out, where the architecture itself was weaponized, where every door was a checkpoint and every room was a cell. George Trevor built it to be beautiful and mysterious and filled with clever puzzles. Oswell E. Spencer turned it into something else, a cathedral to his ambition, a monument to human hubris, a factory where suffering was transformed into scientific progress. And 6 people burned it down. That's what really happened in the Spencer Mansion. Not a ghost story, but a human story. About people who were told they didn't matter, that they were expendable, that their lives were worth less than the data their deaths would generate. And they proved everyone wrong. They mattered. They survived. They made sure the world knew what happened in those woods, even when the world didn't want to know, even when telling the truth cost them everything. The mansion is gone, but the truth remains. Written in survivor testimony and salvaged documents, and the memories of people who saw the worst of humanity and refused to let it break them. That's the real victory, not escaping the mansion, but making sure what happened there could never be hidden, never be forgotten, never be allowed to happen again. Except it will happen again, because people like Spencer always exist. People who look at the world and see only problems to be solved with science and money and power. People who view other humans as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. The names change, the organizations evolve, but the fundamental cruelty remains constant. Chris Redfield understands this. That's why he keeps fighting, why he tracks down every umbrella facility, every black market bioweapon sale, every whisper of viral research in abandoned warehouses and foreign laboratories. Not because he thinks he can win, but because someone has to try. Because the alternative is accepting that the Spencer Mansion was just the first of many, and all those deaths meant nothing. Jill Valentine understands it too. She knows they didn't stop Umbrella that night. They just exposed one facility, one test, one tiny fraction of a corporation that spanned the globe and had resources they couldn't begin to match. But exposure matters. Documentation matters. Every piece of evidence they gather, every testimony they record, every pattern they identify makes the next fight a little easier. And Rebecca Chambers, youngest member of S.T.A.R.S, barely old enough to understand what she witnessed, knows that monsters are real, but so are the people who fight them. She saw her team die. She saw Chris and Jill and Barry refuse to quit, even when quitting was the rational choice. She learned that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. The Spencer Mansion taught them all something valuable. It taught them that evil is banal. It's not some supernatural force or incomprehensible cosmic horror. It's people making choices, researchers who sign off on human experimentation, administrators who approve budgets for bioweapon development, security guards who drag test subjects to their cells, doctors who inject children with experimental viruses, corporate executives who prioritize profit over human life. These aren't demons, they're just people who decided that some lives matter more than others, that scientific progress justifies any cost, that the rules don't apply to them. And if evil is banal, then fighting it is possible. You don't need superpowers or special weapons or divine intervention. You just need to see what's happening and refuse to look away. Document it, report it, testify about it. Make it impossible for people to pretend they didn't know, because that's how evil sustains itself, through silence, through complicity, through good people who see something wrong and decide it's not their problem. The S.T.A.R.S members who survived the Spencer Mansion made it their problem. They could have stayed quiet, accepted the official story, moved on with their lives, and pretended the mansion was just a gas explosion and everyone who died was killed in an accident. Nobody would have blamed them. Trauma makes silence appealing, but they chose to speak instead, to bear witness, to make sure the world knew what Umbrella did in that house and what they were planning to do everywhere else. That choice echoes through the years. When Raccoon City falls, investigators find S.T.A.R.S. reports in the files, warnings that were ignored, evidence that could have prevented the outbreak if anyone had listened. When Umbrella finally collapses under the weight of its crimes, the prosecution uses testimony from the mansion survivors to establish a pattern of negligence and criminal conduct. When the BSAA is founded, its training protocols are written by people who learned firsthand how to survive against bioweapons. The Spencer Mansion's legacy isn't the monsters it created. It's the testimony of the people who survived them. Every report Chris filed, every piece of evidence Jill preserved, every medical insight Rebecca documented, every confession Barry made about his complicity, however forced. They all add up to a historical record that can't be erased or rewritten or dismissed as conspiracy theory. Because unlike the mansion itself, unlike the laboratory and the research and all of Umbrella's secrets, the truth is fireproof. It survives explosions and cover-ups and institutional pressure to stay silent. It survives because people carry it forward, passing it from one generation to the next, making sure nobody forgets what happened in the Arklay Mountains in July 1998. And that's the final answer to what really happened in the Spencer Mansion. A building was destroyed, monsters were killed, secrets were exposed, but most importantly, 6 people walked out of hell and refused to pretend they hadn't been there. They bore witness, they told the truth, and they kept telling it even when doing so cost them their careers, their reputations, their peace of mind. The mansion was designed to consume people and produce data. Instead, it produced survivors, and survivors, unlike data, can't be controlled or contained or classified. They speak, they remember, they warn others, they fight back. That's what really happened in the Spencer Mansion. Horror and death and corporate evil, yes, but also resistance, also courage, also the stubborn human refusal to accept that some people are expendable, or that some costs are acceptable, or that scientific progress justifies any level of suffering. The house is gone, the monsters are dead, but the people who survived them are still here, still fighting, still making sure the world remembers what happened when science operated without conscience and profit was prioritized over humanity. They're the real legacy of the Spencer Mansion, not victims, not test subjects, not data points in someone else's research. Survivors, witnesses, and eventually victors.